the widow, and the wasteland. The sound of hooves hit first, thunder rolling down Dust Creek's single road. Dust lifted off the earth in lazy spirals, sunlight burning it into gold. Dogs barked, shutters slammed, and the creak of the saloon door stuttered shut as the riders came on. Black coats, black hats, vultures. Their leader, Jeb Carraway, sat tall in the saddle, his grin wide and loose, the kind a man wore when he knew no one dared lift a hand against him. His eyes swept the town like a hawk. Sheriff Dalton stood outside his office, shoulders bent, hand twitching near his holster, but never daring to draw. The riders slowed, horses snorting, iron shoes grinding the baked earth. One broke a bottle against the hitching post, another spat in the dust. The sound of spurs, of mocking laughter, filled the silence. Clara McGraw stood by the well. The bucket rope burned her palm as she lowered it, but her eyes never left the gang. She could smell the horses, sweat and dust carried by the dry wind, hear the bridle chains clink as the animals shook their heads. Jeb's gaze found her. His grin spread. "Well now," he said, voice loud enough to carry down the whole street. "Ain't this the little widow? Drawing water for who? The dead don't drink." The gang laughed, sharp and cruel. Clara tied the bucket rope against the post, her fingers steady. She lifted the water, slow and quiet, and poured it into her pail. She did not answer. Jeb swung down from his horse, boots hitting the ground with a heavy thud. His spurs jingled as he closed the distance, one hand tapping the revolver at his hip. "Look at me," he said. Clara raised her eyes. They were cool, unblinking. "Your man owed us," Jeb went on. "He's gone, so that debt falls to you. Land, cattle, or you." His smile bent wider. "We'll be generous. 1 week." Sheriff Dalton shifted, but Jeb's men cocked rifles in his direction, and the sheriff froze. His hand fell away from his holster. Clara's voice, when it came, was quiet. "You'll get nothing." The laughter stopped. The town held its breath. Even the wind stilled. Jeb leaned close, his shadow falling over her. "Careful, widow. Next time we come through, it won't be a conversation. Next time, you'll pay in land or blood." He spat at her feet, mounted up, and wheeled his horse. The black vultures tore back down the street, hooves kicking dust into the air, laughter echoing off the wooden fronts of the buildings. When the dust settled, the town breathed again. Shutters creaked open a crack, doors edged wide enough for eyes to peer through. Sheriff Dalton shuffled across the street, his boots dragging. "Clara," his voice cracked. "Best you let it go. Don't rile him. They'll kill you sure as anything." Clara lifted her pail. The water sloshed cold against her hands. She said nothing, only turned toward the road that led back to her ranch. The sun leaned heavy in the sky by the time she reached her land. The ranch lay quiet, fields dry and brittle. Fences sagged, the barn's roof bowed in the middle like an old man's spine. Her husband's hat still hung on the porch post, its brim curled from years of sun. She set the pail down by the door. Inside, the house smelled of dust and pine boards. His rocking chair sat still in the corner. His boots, polished once, stood beside it, hollow as empty shells. Clara lowered herself into the chair opposite, folding her hands in her lap. The ticking of the wall clock was the only sound. Night came slow. Coyotes yipped across the canyon. The stars burned above the desert like cold fire. Clara sat with her husband's hat in her lap, her fingers tracing the sweat-stained band. A knock sounded against the door. Sheriff Dalton, hat in his hands, eyes lowered. "I try to hold him back," he muttered. "Truth is, I can't. They'll take the town if we push him. And you ought to think on what you'll do." Clara leaned against the doorframe, the lamplight cutting her face into shadow and gold. She said nothing. Dalton shuffled, the boards creaking under his boots. "You're all alone now, Clara. Sometimes a body's got to bend to survive." Her eyes lifted sharp and steady. "And sometimes bending breaks you worse than dying." Dalton swallowed, tipping his hat. "You'll do as you will." He stepped off the porch, his shape swallowed by night. Clara stood alone again, the cicadas buzzing in the brush, the desert air dry as bone. She shut the door, set the hat back on its peg, and sat. Her face was still, unreadable, but her fingers curled tight in her lap. Morning brought the sound of wind sweeping the canyon. Clara walked the fence line, hammer in hand, nails jingling in her pocket. Each strike rang sharp, iron against wood. Sweat darkened the back of her dress, and dust clung to her boots. But the work steadied her hands. She tied wire with practiced ease, her motions sharp, efficient. The ranch might be failing, but her movements bore no clumsiness of inexperience. When she finished, she stood by the fence, eyes drifting toward the far ridge where dust still lingered from the gang's passing. The desert stretched wide, silent, endless. She whispered under her breath, though no one stood to hear, not again. The wind took her words and carried them off across the empty land. By dusk, whispers ran through Dust Creek like dry weeds in the wind. Caraway marked her. She won't last a week. She'll sell, or she'll run. In the saloon, mugs clinked, chairs scraped, voices lowered. Every eye turned toward the door, as if expecting her shadow to darken it. But Clara stayed away. Out, at her ranch, the lamplight flickered through the single window. Inside, she sat at the table with her husband's old ledger. The ink faded, the numbers dwindling to nothing. She closed it softly, laid her hands flat on the cover, and stared at the wall until the flame guttered low. Outside, the desert breathed its endless silence. And somewhere in that silence, a crow called. 3 harsh notes, carried over the canyon like a warning. Clara rose from her chair, crossed to the window, and pulled the curtain shut. The night pressed close. Ghosts of the past. The barn door shuddered in the wind, hinges whining like an old man's cough. Clara pushed it open, lantern swinging in her grip. Shadows leapt across the rafters, long and sharp. Hay rustled under her boots, the air thick with dust and old straw. Something had shifted in the boards beneath the feed trough. The planks sagged faintly, the grain warped different from the rest. She knelt, fingers pressing against the seams. The wood lifted with a groan, and a hollow breathed out stale air. Inside, a chest, iron corners rusted, lid scarred with scratches. Her hand hesitated over the latch. Then it snapped free with a tired pop. The lid opened slow, stiff. Gun oil, leather, brass. A revolver lay across a worn belt, the metal dulled but unbroken. Beneath it, a folded coat, Union blue, the fabric faded to gray. A bullet hole stitched the sleeve. Clara sat back on her heels. The lantern light trembled across her face. She reached for the revolver, fingers wrapping the grip like an old habit never forgotten. The weight fit her hand as if it had been waiting. The barn filled with echoes, rifle fire cracking in her mind, men shouting in mud and smoke, a bugle screaming across a battlefield. She saw herself again with hair cut short, uniform too big, face streaked in powder and blood. The lantern guttered. The vision broke. Only silence, only the smell of hay and oil. She closed the chest, set the revolver on top. Her hand lingered on the cold steel. At the well the next morning, her neighbors whispered, "She's keeping to herself more than ever. She don't scare easy, that one. Scared or not, she'll be dead inside a week." Clara drew water, the rope creaking in her grip. She felt their eyes like pricks across her back, but she did not look up. The bucket hit water with a hollow splash. She hauled it up steady, arms tight, no tremor. On the walk back to the ranch, the horizon shimmered with heat. Far off, a dust cloud trailed where riders had passed. The black vultures left their mark without lifting a gun. Every hoofprint on the road was a reminder. Clara's jaw set hard. That night, she carried the revolver to the canyon. The moon hung bright, silver spilling across the rocks. Cicadas rattled in the brush. She set lantern and bottle beside her boots, loaded 6 rounds with careful hands. The revolver barked. Sparks spat from the barrel, echoes rolling against the canyon walls. The recoil was no stranger to her grip. She reloaded, fired again. Each shot tore the silence open, then left it deeper. Dust puffed off stones where her bullet struck, tight in a circle. Her breath stayed even, her hands steady. By the last shot, The canyon smelled of powder, bitter and sharp. Clara lowered the revolver, listening to the night breathe. Coyotes called from the ridge. She holstered the weapon slow, set the lantern flame low, and walked home in the hush of dry wind. Dust Creek stirred restless. Men muttered in the saloon. Cards slapped down harder than needed. The preacher prayed louder at the church, voice trembling against the rafters. Sheriff Dalton paced his porch until his boots wore grooves in the boards. And whispers followed Clara's shadow down the road. She's got something in her. Can't say what, but I seen the way she moves. Gunfighter's hands, widow or not. Children peered at her from behind their mother's skirts, wide-eyed, as though watching a ghost slip through town. Clara ignored them all. She bought salt, flour, nails, then walked back toward her ranch with her basket balanced neat and sure. The next night, she dreamed. Smoke rising, men screaming. A boy no older than 16 fell beside her, muskets slipping from his grasp, blood black in the mud. Clara's rifle kicked against her shoulder, the enemy dropping through the haze. "Who are you?" a dying man whispered, staring at her face as if he saw through the disguise. Her name caught in her throat. Her rifle roared instead. She woke in the rocking chair, sweat cooling against her temples. The lantern burned out beside her. Her husband's hat watched from its peg. She rose, went to the barn, and touched the chest again. A knock shook the door before dawn. Sheriff Dalton's voice, low and ragged. "Clara, open up." She pulled the door wide. The sheriff's face was pale in the lamplight, his hands shaking on his hat brim. "They're coming," he whispered. "Caraway's gang. Not tomorrow. Not next week. Tomorrow night," they said. "Dust Creek burns if we don't give." Clara's fingers curled on the doorframe. The revolver's weight rested heavy at her side. Dalton leaned close, his breath sharp with whiskey. "I can't fight him. Town won't stand. You could. I've seen the way you look at him. You ain't like the rest of us." Clara's eyes flicked, hard as steel. She said nothing. Dalton's voice cracked. "Please, we'll all die if someone don't step forward." The silence pressed thick between them. Then Clara closed the door without a word. She sat at the table, the revolver laid flat before her, its shadow stretching long across the boards. Her reflection gleamed faint in the steel. Her husband's voice lived in the quiet. "Don't ever let him break you." Clara loaded the weapon, each click echoing in the stillness. She holstered it slow, rose from her chair, and stepped into the night. The desert opened wide before her, wind sweeping low, carrying the faint smell of dust and sage. Her shadow stretched long across the ground as she walked toward the canyon again. And in the hush, the past whispered at her heels. The gathering storm, the hammer-struck nail, sharp against the silence. Another board sealed across a window. The sound carried down Dust Creek Street, where shutters were drawn, lamps dimmed, doors barred. Clara moved quick, sleeves rolled, hair tied back. Sweat traced lines through dust on her face. A boy, no more than 14, held nails for her, hands trembling as he passed them one by one. She drove them steady, her jaw locked. Behind her, a farmer tested the rifle she'd handed him, awkward with the weight. Clara corrected his stance with a sharp tug at his elbow, silent but certain. "Like that." His voice cracked. She nodded once. "Like that." The man swallowed hard, raised the rifle again. All down the street, people worked. Women melted scrap, let into bullets over smoky fires. Men carried crates to the church basement, voices low, urgent. Children clung to skirts, eyes wide, watching the grown world turn hard and grim. The smell of powder seeped into the air. Inside the saloon, Clara stood over a table where maps and crude sketches lay scratched in pencil. She tapped a finger along the alleyways, the back doors, the rooftop lines. Men leaned close, their faces lined, shadows deep under their eyes. "When they come, they'll ride straight here," she said. Her voice was flat, calm. "They'll expect fear. Don't give it." A murmur rippled through the room. Fear was already heavy in their eyes, but her words cut through like a steel edge. "Every rifle waits until the bell rings," she went on. "No one fires first. They break formation, then we strike." She stepped back, letting silence take the weight of her plan. No vote. No questions. The townsfolk nodded, grim, resigned. Sheriff Dalton stood in the corner, hat crushed in his hands, saying nothing. By dusk, the wind had died. The street lay still, dust unmoving, as if the desert itself held its breath. Jeb Carraway's gang rode, and slow. Hooves clinked against the dry earth. The black vultures spread wide, rifles slung loose, grins flashing beneath black hats. Shutters didn't stir. Doors didn't open. The street lay quiet, empty. Jeb reined in before the saloon. His horse stamped, snorted, teeth flashing white. He leaned forward in the saddle, squinting at the shuttered windows. "Well, hell," he drawled. "Town's gone quiet, like a graveyard." The men chuckled low, restless. The saloon doors swung open. Clara stepped out. Lantern light caught her face, sharp against the dark. Her husband's hat rode her head now, brim low, shadow cutting across her eyes. The gun belt rested snug at her waist. She stopped in the center of the street, boots firm in the dust. Jeb's grin spread wide. "Evening, widow." Her eyes locked on his. Silent. "Well, don't you look the part," he said, laughing. "That pistol gonna speak louder than your tongue ever did." Clara's hand hovered near her hip. "Calm. Waiting." The men shifted, uneasy. The air thickened, dry as powder. Finally, her voice cut through. "Leave." Jeb laughed harder, leaning back in the saddle. "Or what? You'll shoot me dead?" Her gaze did not move. "If you stay, you won't see another dawn." The gang shifted again, some laughing, some silent. The air burned with tension, sharp enough to split. Jeb's smile faltered just enough to show his teeth. He spat, tugged his reins, and the black vultures wheeled away, hooves thundering out of town. The echo of their departure rattled the windows long after they vanished. Night came. The town huddled in shadows, rifles clutched, lamps out. From the church basement came the muffled sound of children crying, mothers whispering them quiet. In the saloon, Dalton's hands shook as he poured whiskey. He drank deep, his throat working hard. His eyes kept darting to Clara, where she sat silent by the table, revolver resting before her. "You think they're gone?" a farmer whispered. Clara shook her head once. "They'll be back." A silence thicker than smoke settled over the room. In the alley, the saloon keeper slipped into the dark. His boots scuffed quick against the dust, his eyes darting toward the ridge. He mounted his mule, urging it forward with hurried kicks. His figure shrank into the night, swallowed by the desert. By midnight, the black vultures knew everything. At the ranch, Clara sat in her rocking chair, lantern burning low. The revolver lay across her knees. The creak of the chair matched her heartbeat, steady, relentless. Through the window, she saw movement far off, lanterns flickering on the ridge, faint but certain. The vultures had not gone. She rose, strapped on the revolver, pulled her husband's hat low. Outside, the desert wind had returned, hot and restless, carrying grit against her skin. She walked down the road toward town, her shadow stretching long under the moonlight. Inside the church, Dalton paced. His face gleamed with sweat, his lips moving silent prayers. Farmers sat against the pews with rifles across their laps. Their eyes lifted when Clara entered, silent and grim. "They know," she said. Dalton froze. "What do you mean?" "They know we're ready." Someone told them. Gasps broke around the room. One man cursed, another spit into the dirt. The weight of betrayal filled the air. "Who?" Dalton whispered. Clara's eyes stayed hard, unreadable. "Doesn't matter. They'll strike at dawn." The words hit like a shot. Every head turned toward the boarded windows, toward the first faint glow of the horizon. Clara set her revolver on the table, checked each round with careful hands, the clicks sharp in the silence. She holstered the weapon, lifted her chin. "Be ready," she said. The hours dragged, heavy as stone. Men sat stiff, women whispered to children, the air thick with the stink of fear and oil. Outside, the wind howled low across the desert, carrying the faint rattle of spurs, of horses shifting in the dark. Clara sat still, eyes closed, listening. The creak of a saddle, a low laugh, the clink of rifles being checked. The vultures were waiting too. The town was caught in the space between breaths, every heart hammering, every hand tight on cold steel. The horizon bled faint red. Dawn was coming. Whispers beneath the sky. The bell tolled once, low and heavy. The sound rolled down the silent street. Clara stepped into the dawn. Her boots ground against dust, each step sharp in the stillness. Behind her, the townsfolk crouched in shadowed doorways, rifles trembling in their hands. Ahead, the black vultures waited. Horses lined the street, their breaths steaming in the cold of morning. Jeb Carraway sat at the center, black hat tipped low, his grin cut wide across his face. The horizon bled red, light breaking over the ridge. Dust rose around them like smoke from a funeral pyre. "Morning, widow," Jeb called, voice carrying clear. "Town looks ready to die for you." Clara kept walking. She stopped in the center of the street, hand resting loose at her hip. Jeb chuckled, spat into the dirt. "Last chance. Lay down that pistol. Hand me the deed. Maybe I'll let your pretty head keep its place." Clara's eyes locked on his. Calm, silent. The world narrowed. Dust. Sunday steel. Jeb's grin faltered. His fingers twitched. The street held its breath. A crow called once from the church steeple. Then the gun spoke. Clara's revolver cleared leather before Jeb's fingers even brushed his own. The first shot cracked the silence, flame spitting bright. Jeb reeled, clutching his chest, hat spinning off into the dust. The gang roared in fury. Rifles barked, pistols flashed. Bullets tore splinters from the saloon posts, shattered glass in the church windows. Clara moved like a shadow, each shot precise, cold, final. A man toppled from his horse with a scream. Another spun sideways, rifle clattering. The townsfolk burst from cover, voices raised, guns firing wild. Farmers dropped from rooftops. Women fired from windows. The bell clanged again and again as the church door flew wide. The street filled with thunder. Smoke swallowed the air, choking acrid. Horses reared and screamed, blood spattering dust. Through it all, Clara's revolver spoke steady. One shot, then another. Her arm never wavered. Jeb staggered to his knees, eyes wide with rage. His hand clawed for his pistol, slick with blood. He raised it, trembling. Clara's final shot cut him down. He collapsed into the dirt, face twisted, gun slipping from his grasp. His blood spread dark across the ground, soaking into the street of Dust Creek. The black vultures broke. Some fled, spurring horses hard down the canyon road, gunfire chasing them. Others lay still in the dust, smoke rising from their bodies. The echoes rolled away, leaving silence. Only the moan of the wind and the sobs of the townsfolk remained. Clara stood alone in the street, revolver empty, barrel smoking. Her breath came steady, her eyes fixed on the fallen man before her. The townsfolk crept out, slow, wide-eyed. Farmers lowered rifles. Women clutched children. Men stared in awe. One voice whispered, "She's the ghost." Another echoed, trembling, "The ghost of Shiloh." Heads turned, murmurs spread. Legends once told in hushed voices now pointed to the woman standing in dust and blood. Clara holstered her revolver. The weight of silence pressed heavier than any gunfight. Sheriff Dalton stepped forward, hat in his shaking hands. His eyes shone with something between fear and reverence. It was you," he breathed. Clara's gaze slid past him to the horizon, where the sun rose bright and merciless. Her face gave no answer. By noon, the dead were dragged to the edge of town. The living mended boards, swept glass, washed blood from the dust. Children peered from behind skirts, whispering of the widow who was not a widow at all, but a ghost returned to flesh. Clara stood at her ranch, her husband's hat on its peg once more. She laid the revolver in the chest, closed the lid with a final thud. On the porch, the rocking chair creaked as she sat, eyes on the far ridge where smoke still curled from the retreating gang. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of sage, the sound of a crow calling in the distance. That night, the town gathered in the saloon. Voices spoke in low tones, men swearing they'd seen her outdraw Carraway before he'd even breathed. Others told of her hands steady as stone, her eyes cold as the battlefield itself. The preacher whispered a prayer, then shook his head. "Not vengeance," he said. "Justice." And in every corner, in every murmur, her name grew into legend. The storyteller's voice carried on the firelight, his words rolling slow, deep. They say her shadow still walks the roads, long after the blood dried. Not as a widow, not as a rancher's wife, but as the ghost who returned when the land cried for her. A whisper beneath the western sky. Not vengeance, justice. The wind howled low, carrying dust across the plains. The fire crackled, sparks rising like stars into the dark. And if you listen close on nights when the desert is still, you'll hear her boots in the dirt, her pistol at her side. A widow no more, a ghost forever,